The embrace, the transformation of a mortal into a new vampire, is quite possibly the single most extreme experience that any of these undead will ever undergo. Everything else pales in comparison. No joy, no pleasure, not even the deepest terror can compare to the death and rebirth that Cain's curse grants. The sire, the parent of this vampire, will under most circumstances be fully aware of what they are doing. They have decided to turn this mortal life into one of the undead, fully aware that they will now create a child whom, over time, may grow to despise or even hate them. Indeed, few vampires are so clueless as to not realize the implications of creating a new undead. Yet despite this, despite the knowledge that no relationship can last forever, that even the most passionate love can sour into a bitter resentment, prevent these creatures of the night from creating more of their kind. So, why do they? Why grant the power of your blood to another? Is it out of a desire to create a familial bond? The hope to preserve a mortal's beauty for all eternity? Painful loneliness where even hate is better than being overlooked? The act of procreation exists in all creatures, of course, from the lowliest of amoebas to humans. The common denominator is, of course, the necessity of continuing your lineage, of ensuring the survival of your specific set of genes, your species, for another generation. In humans, many more reasons exist, all valid, of course, whether it is the need for another pair of hands come harvest season, or the desire for safety once they are old. Humans reproduce for a variety of reasons. The desire to love and to be loved in return is not an emotion one should so easily dismiss either, and that is a desire that can be found among vampires as well. Yet a sire is not simply a parent. They usually play no, or a small, role in their child's mortal lives. Exceptions exist, of course, what with the revenant ghoul families, or possibly among clans such as the Tremere, where a future recruit may study under the clan's supervision for years before they are granted undeath, working to, in a way, repay this gift by being a mortal servant of these undead warlocks. Yet traditionally among many clans, a vampire, even a very careful one, tends to only involve themselves in the last couple of years at most, often to poke and prod, to test their chosen mortal's values, strengths, and weaknesses, and doing their best to ensure that they are making the right decision. After all, in most kindred society, the right of procreation is one bestowed rarely and with great honor, so choosing unwisely may in turn bring shame, regret, or even danger. This, granted, is if the sire-to-be is part of the Camarilla, or an anarch in a city where the barons have some manner of wit to them, and care for the ivory tower's rules. After all, it is a rule founded on common sense. Too many vampires in the herd will grow thin, and the risk for discovery will grow greater. Too many young kindred running around may give them ideas, may have them band together, and we have seen the results of that before, haven't we? No, the entire Camarilla society is geared towards considering the embrace one of the greatest honors that a mortal can have bestowed upon them, and contrariwise, one of the biggest responsibilities that any kindred can take on. A sire is alone responsible for their child's behavior until they are deemed worthy of becoming a neonate. Thus, an irresponsible embrace may result in the death of not just their fledgling, but the sire themselves. And even if this child were to live, as it were, and follow the rules and regulations, what's to say they won't turn their back on their sire as soon as the opportunity is given? Or, worse, turn against them and give their secrets to enemies who would like nothing more than to tear this kindred apart. As we know, vampire society has little tolerance for weakness, and creating a child is quite possibly one of the most perilous acts a vampire can do. So, why then would any sane kindred choose to procreate? For servants? Ghouls are far more trustworthy and frankly useful for this, being able to walk in the sun and often holding their masters in higher regard due to their imbalance of power. For a desire to procreate? Hardly. Vampires do not age. There is no need for a new generation if the old one will never disappear or grow feeble. Nor are vampires ever rendered sterile or barren. There is no biological clock at work, so they can create a new vampire whenever they feel like, quite frankly. No, they do not die from age, nor do they grow weaker. Quite the contrary, in fact. Were one to draw up statistics of death amongst vampires, there would be a significant overrepresentation of victims younger than 20 years of unlife. As they grow older, they also die significantly less, obviously, and they become more powerful and skilled in keeping themselves alive. So there is no need for a younger generation to care for them, outside of the realm of new technology and developments within society. But these can, quite frankly, be handled by ghouls or even plain mortal servants, guided by their master's invisible hand. Even if the vampire is in need of help and desires others of their kind to provide this, eventually every sire must come to accept the fact that they are not their child's rulers. They cannot, de facto, keep them under their thumb, at least overtly, as once they are deemed worthy, a fledgling is made a neonate, and thus, in a sense, reaches maturity and independence in the eyes of their community. A child kept too tightly on the leash during their upraising may lash out or band together with others sharing this resentment, which was exactly what happened during the disastrous events of the Anarch Revolt. Even clans as tightly knit as the Tremere or the Banu Hakim know this, and accept that some concessions must be made to avoid disturbing the waters too much. So, childer generally tend not to serve a long-time utilitarian purpose for vampires. What then is the reason for their creation? I would say companionship. Not necessarily lovers, of course, although this is frankly quite often where it might start out, and not just among the more socially inclined clans, of course. A gangrel may huff and scoff at the toreador for their obsession with beauty and emotions, yet gangrel were once human as well, and the desire for companionship remains, even if it is buried under layers of hardened experiences and walled-off emotions. And while a sire-child relationship can be one of a tutor and a student, or even a demanding taskmaster and their servant, it is always tinted by an edge of sexuality. After all, unless the process was extremely clinical, the embrace could be likened to a powerful orgasm released during the time of death and reawakening, and this petit mot will forever remain a strong reminder of their connection. An embrace is both traumatic and ecstatic, and any mortal who undergoes it will be shaped by the experience forever. Just as humans can fall in love with prospective partners, both quickly and slowly, so too can vampires be overcome by a desire, yet one tinted by a rather dark obsession. Vampires tend to want to possess things. The emotional vulnerability of mortals to trust in their lover in order to lower their defenses and expose themselves fully might not always be present in the children of Cain. They may instead spend weeks, months, or even years carefully studying their future child in secret, and even if the sire initially feels a deep passion for their newfound lover, it won't take long until their jaded nature gets the better of them, and they start thinking of their relationship as a risky venture where they would be better off being in charge. We touch once more upon the dangers of vulnerability, just as we did when we discussed the beast and the nature of vampires. It is all fine and good to show your vulnerable side to a mortal, at least aspects of your vulnerable side, but once you've made that mortal into an equal, at least in terms of species, you can no longer excuse your behavior by claiming that they will eventually die, or that no one will believe them, and so on. No, instead they are merely walking reminders of your weaknesses. They have seen you at your most vulnerable, your most exposed, and they will keep these secrets with them for potentially all eternity. A less paranoid creature might be willing to take this risk, But seeing as many sires are older, they've come to develop the healthy kind of suspicion that has kept them alive beyond what their mortal years would have achieved. Thus, they may have their servants stalk their new child, or they may tap their phones, or even get rid of their mortal associates discreetly, all in the name of maintaining a working relationship, despite the ever-shrinking possibility of such a relationship working. Ironically, by doing all this, not only is the sire pushing their child further away, they are also teaching them to act and behave in similar patterns. After all, as the old adage goes, monkey see, monkey do, and that child is naive to the workings of the vampiric society and has to learn from others how to behave, and the sire is, for all sense and purpose, the best role model a young kindred has. This all, of course, is under the assumption that the embrace is done by a relatively older kindred in a Camarilla city. Naturally, this is far from the case at all times. An embrace can be violent and sudden, such as when a mortal ally is bleeding out after a gunfight, and their vampiric friend wishes to preserve them, their skills, friendships, or both, and it can also be done as punishment, or in order to create shock troops for an approaching invasion. The Sabbat's tradition of mass embracing so-called shovelheads can be likened to, and I don't use this word lightly, rape. It is to forcibly have someone undergo the embrace, then leave them to their own in order to dig their way out of the soil they were buried in. There is nothing passionate or intimate about this experience, but instead harrowing and torturous. Sabbat shovelheads are broken down and damaged, victims of a brutal attack, and then told to throw themselves at any stranger crossing their path, all the while their seniors jeer and mock them, only taking in the few, if any, survivors and offering them membership in their exclusive club. What happens to a person forced to undergo this? To be violated in this regard and then just told to fend for themselves? Is that not the very antithesis of a healthy community? But of course, the Sabbat is no community. The Sabbat is an army of broken and tortured souls, convinced that they are monsters and given enough power to lash out against any and all who stand in their way. Unlike poetic justice, where a victim is given the tools to overcome their tormentor, a Sabbat shovelhead is instead enslaved by their pain, fostered by their suffering. There are, of course, traditional ways that the Sabbat embrace, covered more in detail where I discuss these individual clans. I am certain there have been moments where Sabbat Cainites have embraced out of passion or blind lust, Anarchs have created new members out of a desire for warriors and servants, and Camarilla to callously throw against their enemies. But were one to compare the three, it is clear that much of their ideology is based on their perception of rights and relationships amongst their kind. The Camarilla is a frozen hierarchy, the Sabbat a suicidal army, and the Anarchs, free spirits, lacking guidance and stability. The three grandchildren of Cain wait patiently for the time of judgment to arise. Bambi Parsons, a leader with an unbreakable will, Procyon, who has been reborn as a god amongst Cain's angels, and Dugal, whose thirst for blood is matched only by his strength of will and purpose. Their childer, the Methuselah, control our every move through their timeless jihad. They are Her Satanic Majesty Dani, whose presence chills the blood, Socrates Johnson, a masterful craftsman of stories, Lauren Eason, a trustworthy ally and friend, and Alexander Kishtaria, an esoteric scholar and mentor in magecraft. On the council of the Primogen are seated Edward Reed and Ravenfang, whose wise judgment guides our nightly affairs. They are joined by Smear, an exceptional addition to their ranks. This week, the Council would wish to thank the Elder June Pocholo for your continued insight into matters of our common interest. We would also wish to give our regards to the Ancile Envion, whose service to the Council has not gone unnoticed. Thank you for your support. And naturally, all our elders, Ancile, and neonates receive our gratitude from the bottoms of our hearts. Without your support, this would not be possible. And thank you for watching. Now be careful out there, for Gehenna may soon be upon us.